Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 26 mini-series with the Los Angeles Angels. And we are at draft day for the 2027 season. That's what we're going to focus on in this episode. Thanks to everyone who's given us thoughts since the last episode on what we should perhaps do. Definitely a variety of opinions out there, and I totally get it. We're going to be picking later than we typically have in this draft, 14th overall, in what will be our third draft with the Angels. And pretty much every player who is left at this point has some flaws that are in some cases pretty significant. They all have strengths also, but I can understand why there's a lot of dispersion among the worldwide scouting department as far as which way we should go, because there's also a lot of dispersion in my mind as far as what way we should go in this draft. But before we get to the draft, we have been very active on the trade market since our last episode. Our 49-40 Angels set to have the first winning record of this playthrough if we can keep things up. And right now we're also holding on to the last wild card spot in the American League while being 4 games out in the American League West. So the goal is to try to improve this team, not just for this year, but hopefully find some guys who can help us down the line keep this team really competitive for as long as we are playing here with the Angels, and hopefully ultimately lead us to a title. So we've actually made 4 trades today and turned over part of the roster. We've filled some holes on the roster, but unfortunately to fill those holes, we had to create some other gaps that we then needed to try to backfill for. So interested in the assessments of the worldwide scouting department on what we've done. The first one is really the most insignificant. We traded away Brendan Rodgers, who was in our AAA organization this year on a minor league contract, and 20-year-old minor league pitcher Rene Riesch. Potentially excellent stuff, but a alarming lack of control, even though he does have a potential 3-pitch arsenal. He's been good for us in rookie ball this year. They actually promoted him all the way up to AA. But given his lack of control, he was not a big part of our future. We got the right fielder Dylan Cruz from the Nationals organization in return. He's had a solid year with Washington, putting up a 106 WRC plus, and that seems to be kind of what he is, because he had a 105 WRC plus a year ago, and then a 103 WRC plus the year before that. Seems to have fallen out of favor a bit in Washington and also had some health issues this year. The right-handed hitter is really someone we're going to primarily use against left-handed pitching. A pretty average-looking hitting profile, as you can kind of see from his statistics, maybe slightly above average. He's a competent corner outfielder, and he does have really good speed. Stolen 19 bases in each of the last 2 years and 5 of 6 on the base paths this year. So this is not a major trade. The thought is with Mr. Lugo being injured right now as a guy who was platooning for us against left-handed pitching, and the youngster not being particularly effective, although we call him a youngster and he's about the same age as Cruz at this point, that Cruz could take over and maybe give us a bit of an upgrade as a platoon outfielder this year. And the other thing that I do like about Cruz, if we decide to bring him back next year, we are in a situation where another one of our right-handed hitting outfielders who is in a platoon situation this year in Joe Adell is in his final arbitration year right now and set to hit free agency. And my thought is that with Adell looking for over $14 million a year next year for 4 years, that Cruz could potentially become a relatively low-cost alternative to him to bolster our lineup a bit next year. So not the most significant trade in the world, but one that we didn't really have to give up anyone that was all that important to us and that makes sense as far as I'm concerned. The second one is hopefully the most impactful because we have gotten our frontline starter. He's our number one now. I don't really view him as being a number one. I think he's more of a solid number two. But Taj Bradley from the Tampa Bay organization, they were willing to trade him. Tampa Bay looks like they are heading towards a rebuild. Looking at the standings, they're 15 and a half games out in the AL East, trying to compete with the loaded Orioles and the big budget Red Sox and the Yankees. So they were willing to at least talk on Bradley, who's a guy that we've been monitoring throughout this playthrough as someone to potentially try to get. He's been a good, solid major league pitcher, a 104 ERA plus, a 95 FIP minus over the course of his career. So again, although he's our ace, I don't think he's a true ace, but he is a guy with a contract that's already been signed at pretty reasonable numbers for the next 4.5 years. And we also got the Rays to retain about half of that contract. So his numbers are going to be very reasonable for us for a guy who's our first starter right now. And hopefully if we can continue to improve the rotation, eventually becomes a 2 or a 3 for us. Now the price for him was high, and this was one of the areas where we definitely robbed Peter to pay Paul. We had to give up our closer, Luke Weaver. There was no way they were going to do the deal without it. Weaver with 25 saves for us and a 2.09 ERA, and given how problematic our bullpen has been, don't love giving him up. But when I was thinking about things logically with Weaver, we had a reliever who was going to be headed to free agency, whereas with Bradley, we had a starter who we've got signed for the next 4.5 years now at a reasonable level. So I was ultimately willing to include him because, as I said, there were ways they would do the deal without him, but we were going to have to be including a Zach Neto type or big-time, huge prospect in our organization. They really like our center fielder to be in Mr. Rodriguez, and we certainly weren't going to include him. And we also had to include one of the top pitching prospects in our organization. You may remember Mike Cruz. He was our second IAFA acquisition, the first IAFA pool we had in 2025. 2-4 with a 3.50 ERA and rookie ball this year. Certainly looks like he could be a solid major league starter if he reaches his full potential. One of the higher ceiling prospects in our organization. But there was no way they would do the deal unless they got a good solid prospect in return, in addition to Weaver, who they might end up flipping for somebody else as we get closer to the trade deadline. But so that opened up a hole in the bullpen, but it gave us the guy who we think is the best starting pitcher on our team right now, and we've got him for a few years. So then we tried to fill that bullpen hole. This was certainly not anywhere near as good as what we had with Luke Weaver, but we got Ryan Walker from the Dodgers. He was being used, although he has closed in the past on a loaded Dodgers team, he was being used in a middle relief role and had been productive in that role. But they were looking to deal him. And all it took was another guy who was in AAA for us as organizational depth, Bryson Stott, a solid infielder with a lot of speed, but he was unlikely to be impactful on our major league roster, whereas we felt like Walker could start helping stabilize the bullpen a bit, although, again, he's not as good as Weaver. And then we did the second big one, and this is a pure rental. But we did get ourselves the closer. Johan Duran is going to be our closer for the rest of this year, making a ton of money, $11.4 million, although the Twins are going to retain half of that. Looking at an extension for him, he's looking for almost $20 million a year for 4 years, so it may be a pure rental. But that gives us the closer that we were looking for. And fortunately, the Twins had him on the trade block, and they weren't looking for anything crazy for him because similar to the Rays, the Twins are kind of out of it at 37-50, 14 games back, fourth place in the AL Central. Presumably they decided they're not going to sign Duran. So we had to give up a couple of, in my view, mid-range 24-year-old prospects. First baseman Sam Brown has been very productive in AAA for us this year with a 136 WRC plus. Respectable left-handed hitter, but don't see him as being anything but a slightly above replacement level guy at the major league level. And then we had to give up the minor league center fielder Rodney Green. Similar situation with him. He's got really good speed. He's a good defensive player, has some positive traits with the high adaptability, work ethic, and baseball IQ. But he does admittedly also have negative personality traits in the other three categories. Looks like he could be a useful bat with a useful glove, a left-handed hitter. Again, I don't think, unless talent change randomness goes incredibly favorably, that either of these guys become true impact players. But they both could be useful major leaguers for a rebuilding team like the Twins, but didn't see them having a big role in our future, so we're happy to give them both up to rent Duran for the rest of the year. And so he fills in as our closer now, taking over for Weaver. Walker lengthens the bullpen a bit. Bradley takes over as a top starter for us. And as I noted, Dylan Cruz, likely only going to be a platoon player for us, playing against left-handed pitching. But he does give us a competent-ish bat with a competent-ish glove if we have some injuries and we have to play him a bit more against right-handed pitching as well. So feel like those trades move the team in the right direction for this year, and particularly in the case of bringing mostly Bradley, but also to a smaller degree Cruz on board, hopefully also help position this team for success over the next several seasons. So if you've got thoughts on those deals, would love to hear them. And now we will turn our attention to the draft. And as I noted, it's an interesting draft. We're picking 14th, and with the players who are available, they all definitely have some holes in their game. I think the worldwide scouting department is kind of leading us towards a pitcher, and that's kind of where I think I'm headed, but things can change as I talk through the different permutations here with the feedback we have gotten. As I noted earlier, pretty much everyone we're thinking about has some holes in their games. Three position players who were noted most often by the worldwide scouting department. Peter Hooper favors Brian Rahal, also known as Yo-Yo. Second baseman, high adaptability and intelligence, respectable fielder, great speed and outstanding base running instincts, and a guy with really good contact and gap power if he reaches his full potential. The home run power and the eye likely to be both below average, however. Certainly could help us, but as an 18-year-old, he's a long way off. And as some of you have noted in your comments, and I've kind of alluded to in some of my responses, given that we're likely not going to be playing with these Angels for too many seasons, there has been a tie goes to the runner situation with me with the drafts where if things are really close, I'm probably going to go with a college player who I think can likely help us sooner than some of these high school guys who we may be on to our long play by the time they're ready to help. That said, it's not a hard and fast rule. As you just saw, I'm definitely willing to deal, and I'm definitely willing to deal some of the better players in our organization, like I did with the recent IAFA signing of Mike Cruz from about 2.5 years ago. So there's definitely an argument to just bring on the best talent, because a year from now I could be using any of these players that we draft as trade bait. So if it's a real close situation, probably going to go with the guy who can help us sooner. But overall, I'm still going to be inclined to take the best player possible if I think there's a clear answer. Because even if the guy doesn't make it to the majors over these next few years while we're playing with the Angels, we might be able to use him down the line to get someone to hopefully push this team over the threshold towards a title. Two other guys that were noted by the Worldwide Scouting Department, if I can pull them up here. Gabe Wilson, favored by Avery Shaham, and Brian Hanna also likes him. Very good personality, high adaptability, work ethic, and baseball IQ. Competent defensive outfielder. Has good speed, similar to Ray Hall, but not the same type of great base running instincts quite yet. And a very similar profile, quite honestly, to Ray Hall. Really good contact and gap power. His home run power and his eye, both going to be kind of meh. But as a college player, 21 years old, he is closer to potentially being able to help us at the major league level sooner than Ray Hall would be. And the last guy that was noted has the highest ceiling of anybody left, and that's Scott Gearhart. Both Crow Hop and Kevin McDonnell had him high on the lists. Love the defense of this 19-year-old. He is, in theory, a potential two-way player, although given his ratings, not an avenue we would pursue. Not much speed. He's going to struggle to make contact and likely strike out a borderline insane amount unless he makes some significant improvements. Gap power, pretty average, although that's not critical given that his speed is also kind of meh, but potentially outstanding home run power and an outstanding eye. So really his batting profile is kind of the opposite of the other two hitters we're considering in Scott Gearhart and Brian Ray Hall. And looking at the mock draft, if we want to get any of those three position players we just talked about, the time to do it is now. Ray Hall, the high school infielder, was expected to go with the previous pick to the Mets. Gearhart, with the highest ceiling, is mocked to us right here at pick number 14. And then Gabe Wilson, the college outfielder, projected to go 18th overall to the Nationals. So if we want any of those three position players, the time to strike is certainly right now with our 14th pick. But of course, we're not forced to go with a position player, and there are 6 starting pitching prospects that were recommended by various members of the Worldwide Scouting Department as well. And there are 6 of the 8 players with the highest ceilings. The only 2 that weren't recommended are 2 that are clearly relief prospects. Luis Trujillo, liked by Kevin McDowell. The high school player has potentially incredible stuff and incredible control. Potential 5-pitch arsenal. Good stamina, although he's got some work to do learning how to hold on runners. Are concerned that the movement on his pitches doesn't look like it's going to be that great, and he could give up a lot of home runs. Another negative is that he's also impossible to sign, so he's likely to cost way over slot to get him on board. But certainly world-class stuff and world-class control is not something to not consider. But like everyone else with the impossible to sign demands, and the fact that his pitch movement could be a big issue, he's got warts, just like everyone else in this class. Chris Struck, the high schooler, if there is a consensus player, it's probably him. NS1, CLRK, Kevin McDowell both had him at the top of their lists. Avery Shaham and Peter Hooper also gutted out Struck as well. Real good personality with the high work ethic and baseball IQ. The right-hander does have a potential 4-pitch arsenal, but it's going to be dependent on a splitter, a change, and a curveball all developing, and we don't think the ceiling on that curveball is all that high right now. But his stuff and his control could both be well above average, and we think his movement on his pitches could be average as well. So certainly a name to consider. and a guy who's looking for less than slot at this point, which is attractive. Jake Riley, also on the lists of Not My Four-Ply and Avery Shayham. 22-year-old, the toy cannon out of Stanford, is a very close to ready major league pitcher. You can see his slider, his change, and his cutter are not far off major league quality. He's already got major league movement, a little work to do on his stuff and control. The 22-year-old lefty out of Stanford doesn't necessarily look like an ace, but if he reaches his full potential, he's a very good number 2 and a borderline ace. The big question with Riley, though, is whether he's going to be able to reach his full potential, because he's got a pretty bad personality, low work ethic, low leadership, high adaptability. Those are the ones that, as far as his development, probably matter the most, with the work ethic being the most significant. Also has high financial ambition and low loyalty in the mix as well. Great stamina, great at holding on runners. A lot to like about him, and we've got a lot of money invested in player development. We've got some great coaching. The big question is whether we can counteract Jake Riley's natural proclivity towards being somewhat lazy if we try to develop him. Ryan Erickson of the college players is certainly the most popular. Peter Hooper liked him. Avery Shayham, Not My Four-Ply. Calvin Ha also had him on the lists. I think Ozzie Erickson, definitely a guy who could help us relatively soon. Good stamina, good at holding on runners. We start talking about the warts for the potential lefty. He's closing in on 24 years old, so question how much he's really going to improve at this point. No negative personality traits, but no positive personality traits either. That said, his stuff is close to major league quality. The movement is major league quality. The issues are the lack of control, and can he improve that? And the fact that he's really a two-pitch guy at this point, and he's got a lot of work to do on that changeup. If that changeup doesn't develop, he turns into a lefty reliever most likely with great stamina, which is still useful, but I don't know if it's 14th pick in the draft useful. Jordan Bristol, another guy liked by both Peter Hooper and Calvin Ha. High school prospect here with high adaptability and baseball intelligence. Think he can reach the triple digits. Another guy who's going to be really dependent on that changeup developing to develop a three-pitch arsenal. But if those pitches do develop, we think his stuff could be outstanding. Movement also well above average, and control above average, although as a high schooler he's got a lot of work to do on that front. So we'll see whether we sleep on the gimp here with the 14th pick in the draft. And last but not least, Bob Bailey, Not My Four-Ply, and Peter Hooper had him high on their lists. 18-year-old, like the personality, high adaptability, work ethic, and baseball IQ. If you're going to try to develop somebody over the years, those are probably the three most important traits. I think his fastball and his curve are both going to be well above major league quality and not too far off major league quality already. Got some work to do with the changeup and the sinker. Another guy whose stuff and movement we think could both be excellent. We think he can get his control up to major league average, but he's got some work to do there. But he's already fragile physically at the age of 18, and just kind of wonder how far we're actually going to be able to take things with him, given that he's likely to be spending some time on the IL over the years that we'd love him to be spending developing and improving his arsenal. So those are some of the top prospects according to the Worldwide Scouting Department, and I really can't argue with that list that much. A lot of guys that I like, but as we noted, just about all of them have some modest size to significant holes and concerns in their resume. which is going to make this a real interesting decision for me. And there is a little more variety among the pitchers in terms of when they go. Luis Trujillo, the high schooler, expected to go 28th in the second round. You may remember he's impossible to sign. However, Bob Bailey, high school pitcher, expected to go 15th in the second round. So he's a guy that we could potentially circle back on. If we get a little lucky, given that we've got the 16th pick, which is right after Bob Bailey is going to go, Chris Struck, the other high schooler, expected to go with the 6th pick in the second round, and then Jordan Bristol, another high schooler, expected to go with the 1st pick in the second round. So it's not inconceivable that one of those high school pitchers could fall to us. Likely have to take the college pitchers now if we want them. Ryan Erickson, the 23-year-old out of Coastal Carolina, projected to go 31st overall. And then Jake Riley, the 22-year-old out of Stanford, is projected to go 24th overall. Interesting, you can see most of the guys who are expected to go in the draft that haven't been picked yet at the high end are position players. We talked about some of these guys outside of the ones recommended by the Worldwide Scouting Department in our last episode, but no one particularly exciting. And given that this is a short-term playthrough, and given that I am trying to learn how the game works and do some different things and learn something that can help me not just hopefully win here in Los Angeles, but hopefully win for the long term with other games that I play in OOTP. I'm going to do something that I wouldn't typically do, and that's take Jake Riley, the guy with the low work ethic, which really concerns me as we try to get the toy cannon to be a major league pitcher over the next couple years. Certainly a guy who, if things go really well over the next 2 years, could be a great supplement to our rotation. As I noted, we just bought Taj Badley on board. You know, if Riley can come close to reaching his full potential, he could certainly slot in as a really nice 3, possibly even a good 2 for us. And I want to kind of test, as I mentioned, how much the big investment that we have in player development at this point with a $40 million budget, and the big budget, the big investment that we've made in totally revamping our farm system and having some pitching coaches that he's going to be working with, you know, starting with Larry L. Gonzalez, who's excellent at teaching pitching, excellent with development and legendary mechanics, because presumably we would start Riley out in Class A this year to get him some action since the rookie ball season is finishing up right now. Move him on maybe this year to a pitching coach like Oscar Munoz, again, outstanding at teaching pitching, good with development, good with mechanics. Continue moving him up in the organization to Brandon Farley, outstanding teaching pitching, outstanding with development, although only okay with mechanics. And as he gets up to AAA, Bob Gaddy, possibly the best of the bunch, outstanding teaching pitching, outstanding with development, excellent with mechanics. So he's going to have incredible coaching throughout his minor league tenure with us. And as I noted, a huge investment in player development as well. And we'll see if we can get him close to the ceiling that we think he has. Again, it's only average scouting accuracy because it is more difficult to scout a lot of guys here in OOTP 26, and although that's a change, I do like it. I think there should always be a little more of a fog of war with the scouting of the young players than in the past, when it was pretty easy once you had an established team and an established scout to get everyone in the pool up to very high scouting accuracy. So although it makes things tougher for me, I think it's realistic. The OSA really doesn't like him at all. They see extreme development list and a big lack of control. I trust our scout a lot more than the OSA, and I also, to a modest degree, actually trust the mock draft, which has him in a relatively prominent position, 24th overall, which is highest among any of the pitchers that we're talking about. As I noted, it's not inconceivable that we come back to one of the high school pitchers in the second round if we get a little lucky. Don't think any of the position players are going to be there for us, but we're going to try to learn something different. He's looking for slot, so we're going to go ahead and meet the demand on Jake the Toy Cannon Riley. So this time around, it looks like Avery Shaham and Not My Four Ply had the winner on the bingo card for what we ended up doing in the first round of the draft. We'll meet his demand. Selected Jake Riley, and you can see still an error here where it says it's the 15th pick of the first round, even though it was the 14th. Hopefully that's something that they will get fixed in the database going forward. Might as well just auto draft right away and see who is available for us with our next pick. One of the high school pitchers, at least, Bob Bailey, still on the market, so that's positive. Remember, he was the guy who was supposed to go 15th overall right before this pick. The position players that we talked about are, not surprisingly, gone. Bob Bailey still around. And then the impossible to sign Luis Trujillo still around. Unfortunately, though, the other two pitchers, high schoolers we were thinking about, Chris Struck went with the 30th pick in the first round, so we lost our chance on him pretty quickly. And then with the top of the second round, that was supposed to be Jordan Bristol, and he went 28th overall. So actually a couple of the high school pitchers went earlier than we had thought. I have looked at some of these other players before. I talked about the shortstop, Andres Trujillo, in the last episode. He's a high schooler, but if he reaches his full potential, pretty interesting with well above average contact and gap power and eye. Not a lot of home run power. Has some work to do with the fielding skills, but is a second round pick, certainly someone to be considering. And for me, this pick came down to Bob Bailey, the high school pitcher we had talked about before. Really like the potential arsenal. Don't love the fragility. Love the personality. There is some risk that he doesn't become a true three-pitch guy. But I do think the buzzard is pretty good value here in the middle of the second round. But if we want to talk about value, you can also argue Andres Trujillo, who was supposed to go 5th in this round in the mock draft. Left-handed hitting middle infielder, who again has a ton of work to do as a 17-year-old, but we think his contact, gap power, and eye could all be well above average. Decent speed, decent base running instincts that could be improved. Don't know exactly where you play a guy with this profile at this point. Could also be a mediocre corner outfielder, but hopefully it can improve his defense over time. But if he really ends up a guy with borderline world-class contact, gap power, and eye, he's got some value. I will acknowledge that Luis Trujillo is also available, but given that he's impossible to sign, and we still might be looking to do some more as we get closer to the trade deadline, I don't think that's a lever that I'm going to push right now. Given that we went with the college pitcher in the first round, we're going to go with Andres Trujillo, looking for even a little less than slot, so he'll work very well for us. And although he's never going to have a ton of home run power, and he's certainly got some development to do with the glove, the potential, and again, he's a 17-year-old who is way off the mark on any of these with an average personality, so far from a guarantee that he'll reach his true potential or his potential ceiling. And I wouldn't think that he would even in a best-case scenario, but 75 contact, high gap power, and a 65 eye is a potentially very interesting hitting profile, especially with solid speed. And we're going to go ahead and bring on Andres Trujillo here with our second pick with our second round pick and our second pick of the draft. And I don't really love any of the options that are on the board for us here in the third round. The impossible to sign Luis Trujillo, who Kevin McDowell liked, is still around. And we are actually going to go with Trujillo here. Kevin might not like the reason why. I don't think we're going to sign Trujillo, given that we're going to only offer him his slot to start and probably not going to offer him much more. But I really don't like anybody who's available in the draft, or I guess I like some people, but I'm not in love with anyone available here in the third round. So essentially, we'll offer him slot, make him angry. Maybe we'll be able to offer him somewhat more than that down the line, but I'm sure he's going to be looking for an insane amount of money. But picking him in the third round, if we don't end up signing him, which is where I think we'll end up, we'll get a third round pick next year, and maybe the draft will be a little deeper, and we'll like the guys who are available in the third round a little bit more than the guys who are left here right now. So really more of just a strategic move, given that I am pretty confident that the impossible to sign Mr. Trujillo is going to be quite offended by the $890,000 offer at slot level that we just made to him. And here in the fourth round, there's a few interesting college relievers. Tyler Koopman, who were worried about his control and developing a second pitch. Matt Glaude, who were worried about his control and the fact that he's fragile. And Justin Buchanan, common theme here, a little worried about his control and his lack of stamina and ability to hold on runners. I think I'm probably going to go for one of those three guys in the fifth round if they're still available, since I do think that they could potentially have pretty impressive stuff, all three of them, and be guys who could help us in the not too distant future. But right now we're going to go with a high school pitcher that we unfortunately don't know incredibly well. But Manny Cruz looks like he could be a guy with a 5-pitch arsenal if all works out. Pretty good stamina, although he's got work to do holding on runners as well. Lefty, doesn't throw incredibly hard. Your traditional little crafty 5'10 lefty. But still think his stuff, his movement, and his control could all be above average, admittedly with low scouting accuracy. The OSA really likes him for what that's worth, and haven't taken a flyer on a high school pitcher yet in this draft. He's looking for a bit more money than Slot at $800,000, but not an amount that's going to be crippling. So we're going to go ahead and meet his demand, and then hope perhaps that one of those college relievers that we talked about is still sitting here. And it looks like a lot of college relievers are still sitting here at this point, even some that we hadn't talked about. Oh, that's because we're on the OSA view rather than our scouts view. So back to the view that we prefer with our scout, and all three of those guys are still available that our scout likes to varying degrees. So I think for a fifth round, we are going to try to bring in a pitcher that we think could help us over the near term. Tyler Koopman, the lefty, the old fox, 6'7", can reach 100 on the radar gun, we think. Right now, he's purely a fastball guy, so the question with him is developing that changeup and improving that control. Hasn't faced a great level of competition at Pitt Community College. Looks like he's committed to go to Michigan State if he doesn't sign for the final year of his college eligibility, I assume. Although he's only a JUCO sophomore, so there might be more than 1 year until he's back in the draft if he does go there. Matt Glaude, another guy who can reach triple digits on the radar gun. His fastball and his curve aren't far off major league quality already. He's got a little less work to do on his control, but he is fragile physically. which is a concern for the right-hander out of Augustana University. And last but not least is Justin Buchanan. Faced a great level of competition at UNC. Sidearm pitcher who throws in the high 90s, as we talked about. Mediocre stamina and really bad at holding on runners, which isn't optimal for a reliever. He has been very good in the development league. Some positive personality traits with high adaptability and baseball IQ. Low leadership. Has some work to do on the control as well, but his fastball and his slider are not far off major league quality, and either are his movement or his stuff. So similar to everyone we've talked about, these guys all have strengths, but they all have concerns as well. And we're going to try to learn something. Actually, I don't know if we're going to try to learn something. Yeah, we're going to try to learn something, and then we'll come back and hope that maybe one of these other guys is around in the 6th round. Tyler Koopman, I am really concerned about him being a one-pitch pitcher, particularly with that changeup historically being a tougher pitch to really develop fully in OOTP. Also don't love the really poor control, but we are going to see if by force of will our investments in player development and the coaching staff can help overcome the 3 big concerns we have about Tyler Koopman: the poor level of competition he's faced, the fact that he's a one-pitch pitcher, and the fact that his control is nowhere near major league quality at this point. He does have the highest ceiling of these guys, though, and that's why we are going to go with him in the 5th round, looking for a bit more. We've got the money to pay a little bit over, so we'll go ahead and meet his demand. And I do like both Glaude and Buchanan, and they're a little further along in their development, so I hope one of those gentlemen lasts until the 6th round. And one of them did, Justin Buchanan, so we're just going to go right with him. He's probably the furthest along in terms of his current arsenal. Don't love the lack of stamina and holding on runners. To be honest, I preferred Glaude slightly over him because his stamina was a little better, and although he wasn't great at holding on runners, it was materially better than what we have with Buchanan. But he certainly has some tools. I know some of you don't like that sidearm pitcher, so another thing that we'll explore a little bit. But we are going to go ahead and draft Buchanan here in the 6th round. And now that we are getting into the picks where in most cases the ceilings aren't going to be quite as high and the demands aren't going to be much of anything other than thanks for letting me try to play in your farm system. We'll only come back and let you know what we do in these next few rounds if there's something interesting going on. Clearly, with the fact that 5 of our first 6 picks have been pitchers, probably will be a bias towards getting some more position players into the mix going forward. And we have gone focus on position players over our last 4 picks. A couple of high schooler third basemen with Danny Calero and Lou Goldstucker, catcher in John DeWitt, and a college right fielder in Jared Carter. One of the things that I do like about the greater difficulty in completely scouting up the pool in OOTP 26, that new fog of war, even though it makes my life more difficult, is attractive to me because with a lot of these players, we just don't know their personality. And if you've followed me over the years, you know that in the late rounds of the draft, I typically am just bringing on players with incredible personalities to kind of help promote the development of everyone else in the organization, which certainly makes things easier for me, but I like things that make things more challenging. And now, unless I'm really scouting up some of these 2nd and 3rd tier prospects very aggressively and at the expense of the better prospects, there's going to be some who I bring into the system who are neutral personalities and some who are actually bad influences on the others, which will make things a little more challenging to really kind of optimize development across the organization, and anything that makes the game a little more realistic and a little more challenging I like. And I think the greater fog of the war in the draft not just makes the potential of the players and their ceilings and floors more interesting, but it also makes those personalities more interesting, because unlike Forrest Gump, or like Forrest Gump in his box of chocolates, you never know what you're going to get. And nothing all that interesting over the final 10 rounds of the draft either. Mix between pitchers and hitters over those final 10 selections. Nobody who was looking for anything but the opportunity to get paid slot and get an opportunity to chase their baseball dreams. So as we sit here, the draft is over. Feel like we're in a pretty good situation with the guys we brought on board. Really like Riley and Koopman, for that matter, as experiments with college players, just to see how much we can offset some negative traits and negative personality aspects with the investments that we've made in player development and coaching. I think that Manny Cruz is an interesting prospect to have a flyer on. Andres Trujillo, really like as a young shortstop. And then Luis Trujillo, likely not going to sign him. We'll get another third-round pick next year if we don't sign him, and hopefully find someone who's more signable that we like a little bit more in that spot. I guess there is some tiny chance he accepts $890,000, but not expecting that to be the case. So as always, thanks so much for watching. Appreciate all of the input into what we should do in the draft, and would love to hear what you think about some of the trades that we make. We do have another one that we're thinking about. NS1CLRK suggested perhaps trading Adley Rutschman, which would be a huge hit to our team this year, but he is set to be a free agent next year, and there's no guarantee that we're going to be able to sign him. And there are some interesting options available for Mr. Rutschman, two that really stand out to me. We've made trades to improve ourselves this year. I think we'd be weakening ourselves this year if we do trade away Rutschman, but the option might be so compelling, at least one of them, that we have to do it. And I know I'm teasing you a bit with what we're going to talk about in the next episode, but I promise that we'll get to it right at the top of the next episode, and it will be coming out later today. So in the meantime, love to know what you think of the initial trades that we did, and what you think of how the draft ended up. And until our next episode, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.